IELCE activity, but let's say they don't receive any Section 243 funds. They receive just ABE state grant funds. How would they report that on, is it NRS Table 3?
Mm-hmm.
Or in other words, must the provider receive Section 243 funds in order to report students in IELCE and or IELCE's Integrated Education and Training subsection?
That was my understanding, that when the tables specify IET, NRS is really talking about Section 243. Even though, as you're saying, if a program is receiving funding outside of Section 243, not as a specified IELCE program, they may still provide IET, but they should not be reporting it in that table because those NRS table specifications are meant to track IET activity. And Cheryl really, I think, helped to clarify we're talking Section 243 on those NRS tables anytime you see IET. So you would want to report it perhaps in quarterly narratives, and especially if that's one of the goals that our programs have set, but it wouldn't be tracked on the tables as they are now. Becky, can you confirm that's the impression that you had from our trainings?
That is, and I just pulled out my tables again, just because I'm looking at the definitions at the bottom of Table 3. And you do track separately the number of participants enrolled in just straight English language acquisition programs, but not IET, and the number of participants enrolled in IELCE programs, and that specifies Section 243. This number includes those enrolled in IET programs. It does not include those enrolled in ELA programs. So if we're talking about IELCE and IET, we're talking specifically Section 243.
But couldn't a provider who's not receiving Section 243 funds still have an English language acquisition program that has a subsection of IET, correct?
John, can you please repeat that?
Sure. As I look at NRS Table 3, a provider could receive just state grant funds, no 243 section funds. They could have an English language acquisition program, and within that, they could have a subsection of IET programming, even though they receive no 243 funds.
Well, I think you can do it, John. You just wouldn't report it on that table, correct?
No, it looks like actually there is a place where you could report it on that table.
I think it would be helpful, and I know you've got your time constricted, but if we could look at that NRS Table 3.
John, I wonder if maybe, I mean, I think that's something that we all need clarification on, so I'm not sure how much time we should spend on it today. I think today might be better spent understanding what IET and IELCE are, and hopefully the next webinar we can clarify some of those NRS questions. Since we're not 100% among ourselves, I just feel like I am not sure it would be productive to spend too much time looking at that.
Oh, I see what you're looking at, but unfortunately I don't have the capacity to pull it up on this webinar right now because I didn't prepare that. But I can certainly do that at the beginning of the next webinar, John.
Yeah. Sure, and I think it's most germane here sorry to speak over you. I just think it's most germane here to understand that most providers aren't going to receive Section 243 funds. But despite that, you could still have an English language program that has a subsection of integrated education and training. And so, to me, I think that's the relevant component here outside of 243 funds. Thank you.
Right. So I believe what John and Becky and I are looking at is a handout that shows Table 3 from NRS where It specifies 4 different program types: adult basic education, adult secondary ed, ELA, and IELCE. And under each of those program types, there is a line that says Integrated Education and Training Program. So certainly that allows us, I'm not sure how we enter it in LACES. That's where my question mark remains. But the table itself does provide an opportunity to report what you're saying, John. So I see that. And indeed, because it's a permissive activity, programs that don't receive 243 funds, they still have the opportunity to provide IET. So it applies to everyone. That's the key point, I guess, at this moment. Shall I move on for now? Or
Yeah.
further questions?
Nope, I think we're ready to move on. I think we're good.
Okay. Let's revisit it next time. Here, we'll talk about the IET umbrella. What falls under the umbrella of integrated education and training? There are 3 components that fall under that. And you see the first one is AEL activities, which does include English language acquisition skills. The second component are workforce preparation activities. And these facilitate the acquisition of what we would call soft skills, employability skills, marketable skills, transition skills. So there are lots of names for them, but they are defined as workforce preparation activities, one key component of IET. And the third component that falls under this umbrella are the workforce training activities that are for a specific occupation or occupational cluster for educational and career advancement. It includes contextualized, if I can say that, contextualized instruction around high demand occupations. That gives us the definition of IET. If we look at this umbrella, this is our definition. IET provides adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities and workforce training. Another key element of this is that these 3 components are meant to be provided in a balanced way. So students are typically in an IET program, they are needing to be enrolled simultaneously in our AEL activities, which may be the ESL programming, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training. So they're happening at the same time, and they're instructionally balanced, especially as it pertains to the teaching of basic skills. So an IET program may not only provide CNA training, for example. It needs to be balanced with the provision of basic skills instruction through that first component, AEL activities. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I haven't provided you a lot of information specifically, but can you think of an example for each component? What would be an example of an AEL activity? What's an example of a workforce preparation activity? And what's an example of a workforce training activity? Does anybody want to give it a try?
I think I can give an example that's both an AEL activity and a workforce preparation activity.
All right.
I know I'm being daring. Our instructors, our ESL instructors work on filling out very simple online forms where students give basic information similar to what they would put into an online job application. So that's both an AEL activity because it's a language activity, it's reading and writing and technology, but it's also workforce preparation because it does involve some of those transferable skills, but it's not a specific occupational cluster, so it wouldn't be a workforce training activity.
So what would be an example of a workforce training activity?
I think somebody else has to answer
You're right,
that one.
by the way, your example hits the first two.
Okay, good.
Anybody want to take a guess at what a workforce training activity would be?
Isn't that a specific work activity that leads maybe to, does it have to lead to credentialing?
No.
So, but maybe
it can
like
be on the pathway to
okay, so
credentialing.
if they were to get their CPR card on the way to a CNA certification and you were offering those trainings as part of your program, would that work? Or am I way off?
That will work. That will work because it's for either a specific occupation or occupational cluster.
Okay, Mary Gates has one here. She's even bolder than I am. She says food service industry example. So her AEL activity is basic reading and math skills. Her workforce preparation activity is study the ServSafe manual in anticipation of a certification exam, and her workforce training activity is hands-on practice using safe skills in the kitchen.
The last two components they both qualify as workforce training activities. So the hands-on and the studying of the manual, those are workforce training activities. So workforce preparation you would get that, Mary, if there was a component of digital literacy or...
Would test-taking skills be part of that, Laura, or would they fall under more AEL activities?
That one is a little bit borderline. It might fall under self-management, but we'd have to think creatively about that. It might be that you could tweak it and have them learning how to utilize resources, systems, and information by teaching them how to utilize a website to do research about that career. So, but we're on a good track. We're on an excellent track. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Becky, for giving those examples. Here, let's look at some more specific information defining those three components. So first, we're taking a look at ELA, English Language Acquisition, that ELAP, English Language Acquisition Program, and we see that acronym once in a while in WIOA. Here we see what is under that component, the reading and writing, listening and speaking, math, and rights and responsibilities of civic engagement and citizenship, including, that does include the American system of government, individual freedoms, and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation. Workforce preparation activities, so this gives you a little more guidance. It's not fully fleshed out, but this is what we see in WIOA, that workforce prep activities include critical thinking, digital literacy, self-management, working collaboratively. That next one, utilizing resources, systems, and information, and other transition and employability skills. In Minnesota, they put this pretty much all of that under soft skills. So it can be quite extensive because there are many things that we can put under the tagline of transition skills. So this can be transition to college, transition to employment, And our next component, the last component, workforce training activities, we already know it has to be for a specific occupation or occupational cluster. It can include on-the-job training. It can include skills upgrading, retraining, or cooperative programs.
Laura, a couple key points that I'd like to offer and get your feedback. I think it seems to me that there's some overlap in terms of the academic adult education and literacy activities and the workforce preparation activities. Don't you agree? As they relate to critical thinking skills or digital literacy skills, like Cornerstone's example, where English language learners were working on some elementary or basic English language acquisition while completing online. So in a way, that's the digital literacy component of workforce prep and the literacy component of English language acquisition, right?
Right.
And then the key component in determining or differentiating workforce training that it has to be for a specific occupation or occupational cluster. That seems to be the crux of the denotative workforce training activity.
Yeah.
And so what do you think of this? I mean, in terms of workforce preparation, couldn't we say key train work keys or bring your A game would constitute workforce preparation activities? And that a specific certificate, maybe commercial driver's license for a truck driving position would constitute that workforce training component. And isn't it important too to I don't know, note that we don't, as Title II providers, have to be involved in every component? Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
I mean, our Title I partners could be delivering that workforce training or sponsoring that or arranging that on the eligible training provider list.
Yes, they could. They could.
I sense some hesitance.
Yes, they could, as long as that individual is also enrolled and participating actively in Title II. Because of that requirement of instructional balance. So if a student were to stop out and go full-fledged into training for a specific occupation, but they didn't have the support of a basic skills instructor, that wouldn't qualify. It would still be serving the student, but it wouldn't qualify as participation in an IET program. But yes, as long as they are jointly participating, that may work. And we'll look at some models that show how a cooperative program might look in action.
Laura,
because that's an example, John, you're giving an example of like a cooperative training program.
Right. Laura,
Yeah.
I was at Cheryl Keenan's session at COABE, and she actually addressed a couple of things with IET and payment. And she said we can pay for occupational skills training with Title II dollars for IET. Title II dollars may possibly be used to pay people like vocational trainers to provide that kind of balanced instruction that you're talking about. But she did say they feel better about it if we're partnering with existing programs that can already provide those services. So I think there she's talking about that cooperative model, and I think that your caution that they must be balanced in all three of these areas that are up on the screen is a good one for us to remember when we're talking to our Title I and Title IV partners, because you know they're all about the workplace part, and we have to remind them, you know, in our world, that basic skills part is one of the 3 keys, and we have to balance with that as well. So.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like WEO was very, very intentional about providing this guidance in such a way that brings the greatest impact to the learners, recognizing that if these are individuals that lack in basic skills, it's not enough for them to go into a training program. It won't be successful unless they have partnership and support from Title II. And I think that's, you know, very clearly based on research that's been going on about the lack of basic skills in the workforce. So that's directly in response to that national need. So it's interesting.
Can we parse or unpack a little bit the term concurrent as it relates to integrated education and training, that adult ed and literacy activities provide concurrent and contextual with workforce prep? So that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be team taught, right? We could be providing some literacy activities Monday through Wednesday, and then this individual might be going to the local office for some workforce prep on Thursday, and then a workforce training work experience or certificate program on Friday, right? And so while it's not, I mean, in some sense, it's at the same time during a period of participation, but what's your impression or perspective or understanding of how we define concurrent with these 3 components?
Yes, there are several examples of how that can happen. So what you're saying is accurate. I believe, you know, that concurrent might not mean on the same day at the same time. It might be, you know, this happens on Monday, this happens on Friday. And I will show you some examples of what that looks like on a few of the upcoming slides. Yeah, and I think that will help give you further food for thought about this and lend more clarification. But indeed, yes, there are ways to make that work, John. Absolutely. So concurrent is concurrent enrollment. It doesn't need to be happening exactly the same day and same time. So a student may be enrolled in a pre-CNA class and at the same time enrolled in English language acquisition classes, and they have civics and they have workforce preparation activities going on. That is IET. But there are other ways to see it as well. So let me move forward and show some of those. Thank you so much, John. Does that help with concurrent?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so concurrent, it's not so narrow. So we can look at that with some broadness. So this slide before you shows these 3 key components, key aspects of IET, that these 3 areas of IET instruction are instructionally balanced, simultaneous, and use occupationally relevant instructional materials. I think I didn't mention that one before, but that allows us to be contextual. So for example, with a learner that is on a healthcare track, I may be taking their pre-CNA manual from their class at the community college and pulling examples, using it as the text in a literacy-focused class, literacy skills class. That is an example of using occupationally relevant materials. There are a lot of examples of how we can do that, and that can happen in our English language classes, that can happen during workforce prep activities, and it must happen in the workforce training activities. But there are many opportunities to bring that real-life work-based application into our classrooms using those occupationally relevant materials. Here are the three components all together, and this might be a handy reference that I've provided in presentations if people want a cheat sheet about what those three look like together and how they're defined. Here, I wanted to pose a question about why we provide the components of IET. And for some of our teachers, we think about students like Karna, who is 92 years old. He's not in the workforce, but in our program, he has access to IET, and elements of IET are included in his instruction. And the research tells me that this is only to his advantage. So I just wanted to share at this moment that we have research on children that are learning in K-12 settings, and that research tells us that it can take for those English learners, the kids, between 7 and 15 years to acquire the academic language skills they need to advance in their education, even with their focused and continuous instruction. With our adults that are learning part-time, this obviously adds to the time it can take to acquire academic language and transition skills. So with those kids that are going basically full-time, many hours a day, it can take 7 to 15 years. Our learners can't afford to wait to start gaining transition skills or academic skills, critical thinking skills, etc. So the research does suggest that adults learning English will benefit from instruction in academic skills and transition skills while in English classes, even at the beginning levels, rather than waiting until they're ready for a transition class or an advanced type of class. College and career readiness standards and the English language proficiency standards for adult education, that resource that recently came out for us that is a direct step to the CCRS, they give us some guidance about what that can look like, even at our lowest levels of English language acquisition instruction. So food for thought about the usefulness of IET to all learners. It's teaching them the skills they need to be successful in the 21st century, regardless of their goals and their age, because it's research-based, rigorous instruction that we're providing to our students at all levels. And IET is a part of that. It is an option for our English language acquisition programs, but it's definitely a required component of the IELCE program, as we'll see and as we've discussed already. Here, I'm just showing the role of IET with different programs. So this first slide is just looking at the ELAP, English Language Acquisition Program. We are required to have this design specified here, and the last few words again showcase that our English Language Acquisition Program is designed to help our students transition to post-secondary education and training or employment. So although IET is not required of that program, it supports the required design. It supports the objectives of the ELAP, which is most likely why we do have a table that allows us to report we're doing IET programming, even though maybe we don't have Section 243 funding. We'll have more details about that at a later time. And here, remember the distinction between the IELCE activity and the IELCE program. The IELCE activity may be happening within our English language acquisition program. And this activity, it may include workforce training. So if I have an English language acquisition program, I may include workforce training. And it's beneficial to the students because I'm required to give the learners the skills they need to function effectively as workers. So that helps me to achieve that goal. And then this is the Section 243 specification that if I have an IELCE program, IET must be provided. My IELCE program must be provided in combination with IET.
Laura, can I jump in and just mention IET is also an activity that's valid for ABE and adult secondary learners. So if you're somebody who's listening and you're working predominantly with those groups, this all still applies. You just substitute in ABE for ELA and you're still fine.
Perfect. Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome. I had a couple questions.
That's an opportune time to make that statement. And I feel that what I share in this webinar and our subsequent webinars you'll be able to, even though I'm talking about English language learners, I think you'll be able to make some pretty easy connections to what you would do with a native English speaker.
Definitely.
Here's just a reiteration of the 3 key points that we have to keep in mind with an IET program or an IELCE program. IET activities, here point number 1, must be instructionally balanced proportionately across the 3 components, and it really is emphasized that these are balanced particularly with respect to improving reading. I wish I could, I keep pointing with my finger instead of my pointer. Reading, writing, math, and English proficiency. So it really is emphasized that we don't miss out on this because our adult learners, our AEL learners need that support in order to be successful in the workforce. So we can't forget that required component of IET and the role that we play as Title II providers in this workforce development system. And here, number 2, they must occur simultaneously. So students are co-enrolled. It could be one class that has all these components, or it could be 2 or 3 separate classes happening during the same time frame, but those students are co-enrolled. So for example, we do have students that are enrolled in all 3, but they're separate classes. We also implement a model in our program where all of these 3 are happening at the same time in one class. So I will show you what that looks like later. And number 3, these IET activities must use occupationally relevant instructional materials. That, of course, is the point of contextualized instruction when it comes to preparing students for work in the IET model. And we do have direct connections to our college and career readiness standards. As John pointed out earlier, there's overlap. You can see overlap between the AEL activities and workforce preparation activities. And we get some of that overlap in the college and career readiness standards where there are opportunities to enhance rigor and provide skills development that is clearly connected to workforce preparation. IET helps us answer the question, English for what? I talked to my teachers during in-service just 2 days ago and made the comment that There's so many different acronyms for what we do in ESL, ELA, ESOL. There's ESP, English for Specific Purposes, English for Academic Purposes. But I emphasize to my teachers, we must not teach TENAR, T-E-N-A-R. So that's definitely the wrong way to go with teaching ESL, because TENAR stands for Teaching English for No Apparent Reason. We must never teach TENAR, and that's the point of contextualized instruction, that we're teaching English in the context that is applicable to our students and helps them reach their goals for the future. And IET gives us the opportunity to provide the contextualized instruction that's applicable to our students and helps them directly meet their goals, especially when we look at that workforce training component and we're looking at specific occupational skills training. Here's a moment for you to stop and reflect on why could you share one reason implementing IET would be important or is important for your learners or your program? And maybe you're seeing that there are ways you're already offering components of this. Is it easy to think of a specific example, a specific student where IET is important for this person? Maybe the reason is we want to implement it because we have to implement it. I don't know.
Well, and with that, I think it's worth noting that integrated education and training programs are not required. Obviously, they're strongly encouraged, but they aren't necessarily an absolute requirement under WIOA. But I think realistically, given our unemployment rate and the people we serve and the barriers they have, many people need an earn while you learn sort of an opportunity. It can't be, and you've highlighted this well, Laura, over the years. Our recently resettled refugees only have 8 months of cash assistance, and then, you know, they're left to their own devices. And so to think that we can wait 5 to 7 years until we have a high level of English language mastery is you know, naive, if not, you know, absurd. And so we need to find models that can contextualize, give them the so what, English what for a livelihood, for linguistic, civic, and economic integration. And so I think that's one reason why I think this model serves our purposes and, more importantly, our students' needs.
Stephanie,
well said, Jen.
Yep, Stephanie typed, we have some learners who work in specific industries that feel better about being in the workplace when they understand what the expectation is. People meet or exceed expectations when they understand what is needed and necessary. And to kind of piggyback off that, I know it's a great point, isn't it? And I think to piggyback off that, Kim and I have had conversations in the last couple of weeks just about the fact that we see IET as a recruitment and retention tool for our students, because so many of our programs have seen our GED numbers drop as well, and that's because our unemployment rate is so low and people are out working. But, you know, are they working in fields that pay a living wage? And could we draw some of those students in if we were offering some occupational skills training that led to those stackable credentials that put them on a path to a higher wage career? Would that be an impetus to get them back into our programs and help them see the value of, you know, not just why teach English, but why teach any basic skills?
Mm-hmm.
And although it's my understanding that we don't necessarily need to be the core program that delivers the workforce training component, we can be, and sometimes we are, but I would assert that this is an opportunity for us, and I've mentioned it before, Director Plummer a couple of years ago at Summer Summit after the Denver COABE articulated well, it's an opportunity for us to rebrand and recalibrate that we're not adult basic education anymore. We're workplace literacy, workforce readiness, and so I think it gives us the ability, and under WIOA, we as Title II providers now have the ability to deliver that specific occupational training where under WIA that was not an allowable activity.
Excellent. Thank you for those comments. All good. And I was surprised, pleasantly surprised by Stephanie's comment about a reason for IET, partly because I recently have heard it from local employers, that employers are saying we need, and in relation to the clients that we're training or the clients that maybe don't go through training but get hired before they go through a class, our local employers are saying that they want their employees to know the expectations, and they feel like the expectations of them are not clear before they get on the job. So I feel like it's really a resounding need, both from, as Stephanie said, from the learners themselves, from our adult learners, and from the employers. So we benefit everyone. I am feeling that I should give you a huge teaser and not go through the program models today, but save them for our next webinar, because we have only 4 minutes remaining for today. So if you would allow me to do that, it won't take much time, but I don't want it to be rushed in case you do have questions about that. And perhaps you have questions about what we've covered already. So I want to give you an opportunity in the last few minutes here to ask any questions that you have about the definition of IET.
I think, Laura, if you could share that matrix with us that you showed with the definitions of in the 3 areas, it would be nice if we had that, especially for the next one, so we can kind of refer back to it as you're talking, because there's so many acronyms, and sometimes I think that gets to be more confusing than actually understanding what it is, but what's the acronym?
I know. Yes, I would be happy to do that, Kim.
Thanks.
Yeah. I know I pull out my cheat sheet about that on a very, very regular basis, and it's taken me a long time to really internalize the terminology there. So I can see how that would be helpful, because it's been helpful to me, especially thinking about the terminology, the workforce preparation activities and the workforce training, and really feeling solid about what those are. Any other questions or requests that you might have? And feel free to type it in the chat box. Becky will read it for us, because I can't see it. She's reading it for me, I guess.
Mary just confirmed for you that it's a good idea to hold on to those models until the next webinar. So.
Okay, thank you, Mary.
You know, there might be instances where work keys might be considered workforce preparation as a workforce preparation activity, but do you think that if there's a specific job that requires it, not prefers it, but requires it, do you think then that work keys would be considered a workforce training component rather than necessarily a workforce prep? So what I'm getting at is, does it depend on the context or the relativity of the situation?
Ooh, that's kind of a tough one, John. If it's required by a a specific job, you're training them for that specific job, but is the material occupationally relevant?
It's not really a specific.
It's relevant to the requirements of the job, but it's not relevant to the specifics of the job itself.
It's really required by the employer and not by the job.
Yeah.
Which I think might be the sticking point there.
Yeah. I would think that the context of the job itself or a job cluster, like everyone goes, I default also to the very clear-cut pre-CNA track or RN nursing career pathway. Right. If it's in some way specific to the work that's done in that occupation or occupational cluster, so it might be the medical field itself, then it's workforce training, but I'm not so sure if it's something as general as work keys. I feel like it would still fall under workforce preparation activities, but as I'll talk about in the next webinar, there are ways to enhance that work keys activity. If we tag something on that gives the learner opportunity to do a deeper dive into an occupational cluster area, and ironically, a term that's used to describe that is cluster teaching, cluster vocational English language instruction, where you provide the student an opportunity to, within their regular ABE or ESL instruction, and they're doing something like work keys where it is workforce preparation, but you're also assisting them in doing targeted study for a specific field, then we have the full spectrum of IET there. So for example, we do have a student in our evening classes who he's been hired by a local nursing home and they want him to pass his CNA test. So he's studying with us in English classes because it's still beneficial to him to improve those basic skills. He's not able to be successful independently studying for the CNA test. But we have the opportunity to help him do some independent studies in the area of nursing and CNA. Using a volunteer and guiding him to some websites where there are already some materials available to him, having him with his CNA manual, and having an instructor or a volunteer help him study some of the vocabulary and ask questions about that outside of his regular class that he's enrolled in. So I think, John, there are ways, what I'm trying to say is there are ways to make that work, but I feel like you need something a little bit more contextual to the job itself. That's my understanding.
I'm going to cut in at this time because it is after 4:30 in the area of being cognizant of everybody's time. Do you have any closing things, Laura?
I don't, but join us next time.
Great, and we will send out an email reminder again hopefully about an hour before, but you should all have it available on your calendar, and it is on the South Dakota website in the professional development calendar if you want updated information. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, Kim. Yep, you bet.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You too. Bye, everyone.